Great. Let's give folks maybe a minute or two here to come in. Um, shall we, David?
Yep, absolutely. It's a lovely
Perfect.
morning for it, Graham, so why not?
It sure is. It sure is. Remind me where in the world you are again, David?
I am in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm up in Seattle. And
Wow.
it's this sort of it's we're trying so hard to be in summer and we were doing really well until today, and then it's like torrential rain again this morning. So it's that whole thing, people say, Seattle, it must be like living in Ireland. No, it's not that wet, but yeah, okay. We do get a little bit of,
Not too
we're between
far.
two mountain ranges, so we get lots of rain.
Yeah, it amazes me how folks also stay there, you know, afterwards. I remember going through Seattle Airport and where normally in airports you see economy and business class, you see economy, business class, Microsoft, Amazon check-in desks.
Yeah, that's
Haven't seen
because
that anywhere
there's
else.
there's nobody else, right? That
Yeah.
is kind of it.
Microsoft
I
and
mean, it
Amazon
is.
pretty much is tech Seattle, right?
Well, if you think about it, you've got Microsoft, you've got Amazon, you've got Boeing, you've got Starbucks, Nintendo of America, and that's pretty much, that makes up a large, percentage of the working population here.
Yes.
And now with Starbucks are moving they're moving their headquarters down to Nashville, so they're the first to go. But it's still, Seattle still remains a pretty decent tech hub.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing when you see um not just, even some of the tech startups that are starting to appear there. It's great to see the ecosystem expand outside of Silicon Valley and dare I say New York as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's again when you've got and Google have got a big campus here now as well. Meta have got a growing campus. So
Yes.
wherever you see the big tech hub, the big tech companies, it always builds then an ecosystem of early stage companies around that. So the startup scene in Seattle is
Yeah.
pretty strong. It remains, there's a lot of venture funding, which is old Amazon and old Microsoft money, now
Yes.
promotes a lot. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's now going through the cycle again to promote that sort of entrepreneurial next generation of tech. And so it's a it's a lively environment.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Hello to everybody that has asked us to send recordings of this session. I'm super excited for this one today to have a chat with David Warrick, one of the absolute leaders in the industry at such an interesting time in AI. Um, myself, I'm Graham Parker. I'm founder and CEO of Chip Angel. We are a BCO software company. Before that, I was the CEO and founder of a company called Kontainers. We built platforms like Ship.Maersk and two more top 10 carriers and six top 20 forwarders. And here now in the Ship Angel journey, we are focused on software for shippers. And we were very lucky to be born right in the AI era, took full advantage of it. But I'll hand over to David to introduce himself. But I just say that, for uh, I feel like I've spoken to every kind of leader on the BCO shipper side, every chief supply chain officer, every senior person in logistics over the last 6 years, kind of since COVID started. And me, David, is literally one of the most thoughtful leaders in the space. There's really nothing he doesn't know, and uh, particularly his kind of second and third level thinking about the ecosystem just has always blown me away, thinking about how big companies can help the ecosystem and how it comes back to help themselves, and just to thinking strategically and differently. I'm so excited to have this conversation again, especially in this kind of crazy time for AI, not just in the in our supply chain software world, but I think everybody on the planet is talking about AI right now. So it's an interesting juncture. And thank you very much for taking the time, David.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Graham, and you're very generous in terms of your introduction. I don't know if my random wanderings constitute a true strategic intent, but yeah, I get to talk with a lot of different supply chain leaders around the world, and it's always interesting. So my career, I'm a manufacturing engineer, I'm a chartered engineer. I started off in high
Wow.
volume manufacturing actually with Coca-Cola, and then took a sideways step into big construction. And I was working actually for a small company based out of Belfast in Northern Ireland called Rotary International. And this was a building services engineering company. So think about, everything that goes into a building from electronics, from an electrical perspective and from a mechanical perspective. That's what they do. And they just won the contract for the new Hong Kong airport, which was the biggest construction job in the world. So we built an island and then built an airport on top of it. And so as a young graduate engineer, I spent a couple of years in Hong Kong working on building the airport. Then decided I needed to get back into a real job again. And construct international construction is kind of strange, right? I mean, it's a hard and harsh environment. A lot of fun, but it was a tough time. So I joined Anderson Consulting, as was now known as Accenture. Back in the day, it was Anderson Consult before the whole Enron thing, and joined there as a consultant in the late '90s, and worked across multiple different industries. A lot of actually indigenous manufacturing companies in Ireland, because at that time Ireland was still one of the manufacturing hubs around the world. And then my final job with Anderson Consulting was actually working as a consultant for a little company based out of Sandyford in Dublin called Microsoft. And Microsoft had just moved from insource to outsource from a manufacturing perspective. And back in the day, like this was 1999. So Microsoft really had two products. They had Windows and Office. And if you this is before your time, Graham. But if you remember, like Windows and Office, there were a big amount of disks and a large number of manuals, and that was it. You stuff those in
Yes.
a box and you sell them. Your COGS was so low, you didn't worry about forecasting or planning because it didn't matter. The most important thing was to have the product available on the shelf. And it was a pure distributor model. We didn't sell into retail. We sold through distributors, and it was all pallet based, and it was really easy. Bill Gates was actually CEO when I joined. So I lived through all three CEOs. I was there through the
Wow.
BAM when Bill started when I started. Bill was CEO, then Bammer, and then Satya in my last few years. And Microsoft was just an amazing opportunity. I was involved in everything from a supply chain perspective, and it was only at that time that manufacturing and logistics was somehow coupled together and labeled supply chain. It didn't actually exist until, probably the early 2000s. I
Yeah.
was fortunate enough to be, I was the original project manager on the Xbox project. And so I got to build the first Xbox console, set up
Ah.
manufacturing, distribution, logistics. We had to build a retail channel. And then Microsoft was one of those companies which just kept on giving you more. And so I was then running, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, and Japan. I moved over to the US in 2012. Um, and then we did the Nokia acquisition. So we integrated Nokia into Microsoft, and then we dressed it up and then sold it again and moved it on. Then we started building the Surface PCs. And again, I was back in China, spending a bunch of time running factories in southern China. And it was a fabulous journey. And the last few years, I had this crazy idea that SAP as an ERP system was actually a limiter to supply chain evolution. And it was, I thought about it and said, okay, well, what else can I do? In the corporate environment, SAP is your transactional system of record. And so a lot of the time, it was focused on compliance and finance. Any amendments that could be made had to be pushed on those categories. And so supply chain tended to fall to the bottom of the list a lot of the time. So this was super frustrating as I was trying to build, buy online, pick up in store type of models and direct to retail, direct to consumer. So we made a decision, and that was we were going to keep SAP as our transactional system of record, but then start looking at new technologies to augment our existing supply chain. And so I went out to private equity and venture capital and just said, "What have you got?" And got inundated with everything from, I probably asked the wrong question, but I made a lot of friends. I got introduced to a lot of people, and I started to bring technologies into Microsoft, which were relatively, new companies, to augment our existing $10 billion hardware supply chain. And it was super successful. Microsoft told me I was now supply chain chief technology officer. They wanted me to build a plan for how we would do this further. Microsoft actually built a product around it called Supply Chain Platform. It was a lot of fun. But by 2022, I'd done my 23 years. I was tired, and I just was so excited by the amount of investment, the way that supply chain we'd got the attention out of COVID, and now we were suddenly front and center in every boardroom at every C-suite table, and now is the time for supply chain to power forward. And so
Yes.
here I am.
Wow, what an incredible journey, David. Just even thinking about, as you said, like starting off with kind of, the old CD-ROMs or discs or whatever going out in shipments to like Xboxes to Surface devices to tagging on Nokia. All of a sudden you become this huge kind of mover of global freight. It's
Yep.
incredible, right in the middle of your tenure. So that it's fascinating to hear you talk about it, because very few people have gone through that type of growth, where Microsoft was very much a software company, and then it didn't just become a hardware company, it became games consoles to mobile phones to Surface devices. It's incredible to see the growth. So that's incredible. um for today's conversation, we put together kind of just a couple of different parts. Um, starting off, just double clicking a little bit more on the Microsoft era, going a little bit deeper into the shifts that we've seen since, like you mentioned, particularly since the year 2000, supply chains have evolved a lot.
Right.
And then, of course, we can't get too far into the conversation without getting into AI and what's real and what's vaporware and what's hallucination and what's real. Um,
Right.
Starting over in 2026, and then maybe some context and some things that we've seen that might work and that could be interesting to folks as they kind of try maneuver their way through this crazy journey. So I'd love to start, David. And you've kind of set the stage really well there, just thinking about that kind of um, not just the breadth of products that you had over kind of that 2 decade growth, but it truly was. People talk about global supply chains, international versus domestic. I mean, as you said there earlier, you had factories in South China and you were responsible for Africa, and that must have been just unbelievably complex. As you were also growing rapidly through those multiple uh, product lines, acquisitions of Nokia. Um, what was it like, kind of, in the heat of that kind of growth curve, and what was it like from a supply chain software perspective as well?
I mean, it was mostly chaos. I mean, we when a software company tries to do hardware, a lot of interesting things happen because all of your models and all of your
Mhm.
systems are based around software, which is completely different fundamentals. When you think about even, concepts like planning and forecasting, to my earlier point, when you're producing products with a very low level of cost,
Mhm.
you can take a lot of risk on inventory. When you're producing something that is actually, cost negative, so you're actually, it costs you to produce every single item,
Yes.
inventory is a whole different problem. And so even from a balance sheet perspective of the company, it was we were always under a lot of pressure as a supply chain to try and figure that out. When we actually acquired Nokia, um, at that time, Nokia and Apple, from a volume perspective, were pretty much neck and neck. So,
Wow.
on some of those really busy years, we were shipping, it got into the hundreds of millions of devices into
Wow.
140 countries around the world. And whenever you were launching a product, be that a game, be that a console, be that a phone, you were doing it at a scale that, very few people understand. I mean, I've got a couple of plaques behind me here, the ones that everybody comments on, Halo. So
Yes.
these plaques are representative of the fact that for Halo 2 and Halo 3, when we launched those products, those were the single biggest media launches in history at that time. When we launched
Wow.
Halo 2, we moved more units than the equivalent number of showings of Titanic on the same day. Because my job as the supply chain guy was I had to get, what was it, three or 400,000 units of that game into about 60 countries around the world for a same day launch. Like, just think about
Oh.
the complexity of doing that and the number of retailers
Oh.
that you had to get into, the number of time, the number of things that could possibly go wrong. And as a supply chain, so here's here's the story. And I tried to remember this last night. I'm pretty sure it was Halo 3. But I think it was around 400,000 units, and we were launching simultaneously around the world. And everything was going, it was a rough launch, but everything was going just about the plan. And a very senior executive in Microsoft at that time, and I'm not going to name any names, was in Australia and happened to be passing through Alice Springs, right? And there was a very remote little, I think it was a JB Hi-Fi little outlet store. And he walked in there on launch day, and there was no copies of Halo 3 on the shelf. So I get a phone call asking me why the launch was a disaster. And I'm kind of scratching my head going, 399,998 copies have all successfully got to the right place at the right time. And I
Oh.
get pinged on the two that aren't. But as a supply chain practitioner, you're known for your last mistake, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's a lot of how this works. But it also, Microsoft was that it's an incredible company with a relentless pursuit of excellence. And so
Yes.
while it sounds ridiculous, we would actually get bent out of shape around those two units, because we would look at it and say,
Wow.
why were we not there? Why were we not perfect? And when like the launch cycle of products in a hardware business with a software business on top of it is crazy. You don't get a
Yes.
break. Every single
Yeah.
quarter, there's a launch cycle that you're having to manage from a retail, from a direct to consumer perspective. There's so many moving pieces, and your supply chain tech is critical in terms of trying to keep you ahead. And we had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to work around the systems. And that, it sounds
Yes.
strange being even a Microsoft, but we were a software company, but we weren't a supply chain software company. And so we were
Yeah.
struggling with a lot of the same things that the industry was struggling with, trying to find a way around it.
Wow, it's amazing, and there's a lot of parallels here for me as well between kind of Apple and Microsoft because famously when Tim Cook came into Apple, he was kind of the supply chain guy, and he
Right.
famously looked at their inventory levels when they were like 90 days away from bankruptcy and cut them down dramatically. But it must just be an incredible layer of complexity if you were looking at multiple products in dozens of countries and trying to get just enough stock in just at the right moment. Given just how complex everything is, and one factory delay can cause all sorts of issues. The layer of
Yep.
complexity there must be just absolutely insane.
It's a constant juggling act, and you get very good at, we actually, one of our principles was really interesting. We were, at the time we were big fans of Dr. Howley out of Stanford, and he'd
Oh
written a
yes.
paper called the AAA Supply Chain. And we actually, probably around 2003, 2004, we actually took that paper and said, we're going to build our supply chain is going to actually resemble the AAA supply chain. And we, because we were
Wow.
Microsoft, we were able to, I knew Dr. Halley personally, and so we were able to bring him in and have that conversation and say, what are the things that we should focus on? And agility became a big thing.
Yes.
Agility was, your ability to, why are you always talking about finished
Mm.
goods? Why don't you start thinking about postponement? How are you thinking about
Mm.
your DC network? What about forward placing some inventory? Why are you always waiting for something to happen? And the thought process was really more around, agility and supply chain. And this was one of the problems. One of the problems was the physical supply chain was always ahead of the digital supply chain. And we actually
Yes.
created a function called the digital supply chain. And we
Wow.
put some of our smartest brains on it. And their job was to break the way that we thought about traditional supply chain because we realized there was a gap and we knew that was how we had to get ahead. But it was super challenging. And one of the principles of agility became absolutely foremost in everything that we did. It was like we would actually bench any idea, anything that we had in terms of how we would get better. We would bounce it off the AAA supply chain. We would bounce it off the concept of agility to make sure that we were doing something that was accreting to the overall value. So we were,
Wow.
we were forward thinking in terms of we'd done a lot of the Kaizen theories. We'd spent a lot of
Yes.
time thinking about all of the Toyota way and all of the really cool stuff of traditional manufacturing, and then we started applying it in, if you like, in a modern way, whereby, eliminate the muda, right? Get rid of the waste out of the system. But
Yeah.
we thought about that at every single level. It wasn't like a project in terms of, well, now we're going to go and try and reduce our waste by 10%. It was every single thing that we did, every single action that we took. We said, well, is this the right way to do it, or is there a better way?
Yeah.
And this would, we were a heavily outsourced supply chain. And we had this concept of insourced outsourcing. And what does that mean? It means that when you walked into one of our outsourced facilities, you would think it's a Microsoft facility. The way that things were positioned, the cleanliness, the organization, the structure, because we had people constantly coming through. We realized that contract
Yes.
manufacturing had this interesting twist that whenever there was an official visit to a factory, everything was in place and everything was clean and everything looked really good. If you did an out of cycle visit, you started to see where some of the real challenges were. So we started
Yeah.
placing people in the factories, and that meant that the standard
Ah.
of those factories actually increased to what we would say was our standard. And it
Wow.
became fascinating in terms of, but then that allowed us to be more integrated into the different processes. And it also made
Yes.
sure that, we were continually pushing the way that we thought about supply chain into our
Yes.
ecosystem. Now, the companies
Wow.
that work with us, they went through a lot of pain, but every single one of them would tell you now, if you interviewed them, they would say Microsoft were really hard to work with, but they continually made us better. And that's the way
Brilliant.
that we looked at it and said, that's how it should be, right? No,
Yeah.
outsourcing is not abdication, right? It's not,
Yes.
somebody else's problem. They go deal with it. And that's what we saw a lot of companies doing. They were treating it as, well, that's not my problem anymore. And now I'll just beat this vendor until they get it right. We
Yeah.
actually took a sincere interest in it and we jumped right in and said, this is going to be hard for everybody, but we're going to make you better. And they really appreciated that. And we got to a whole different place. We didn't worry so much about the money aspect of it. We worried more
Yeah.
about how do we get this to a level that nobody else has ever done before.
Wow. Amazing, David. What a journey. Um, and I guess kind of like a good segue then from there is, and you mentioned at the top of the show here, um, you look at kind of the 90s and, you had a lot going on in the supply chain, but then, 2000, you started to have the internet, you started to see kind of like more software um, start to appear. Um, when you kind of think about that kind of, the biggest shifts going back all the way to 2000 to now, um, it feels in some ways that a quarter of a century plus later, a lot has changed. And in other ways, it feels like, we're still dealing with, systems that were built in the 1990s in a lot of cases. And how do you kind of square that circle, like in terms of when you think about we've come very far, but we still have a long way to go?
Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating. And like you've been in this industry, what, 25 years. I've been in it over 30 years. And you come across the problems that you kind of say, I thought I'd actually fixed this 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Why is it still there? I mean, I
Yeah.
I met, I met a company recently and they're still using AS400. And
Wow.
I said to them, why? And they said, well, because it works. And I couldn't really fault that answer because there is, one of those supply chain fundamentals, if it's not broken, don't fix it. We
Yes.
had to there was so much fear and trepidation around the year 2000 problem that caused a massive swing in terms of movement of ERP systems and upgrading of platforms and technologies. It then probably took supply chain 3 or 4 years to figure out what they'd actually done in that transition. And then there was a gap, and we were heavily reliant on the traditional systems, right? The
Yeah.
Manugistics, the Manhattans, and these are
Yeah.
great systems, and they continue to be great systems, like great platforms. But they took a lot of effort to get to the right place, and
Yeah.
you've seen this, right? I mean, it just amazes me that a company with numerous sites and numerous instances of the same software treat it in a completely different way.
Yes.
Simple things like SKU numbers, free text fields. These are, when we
Yeah.
talk about supply chain, one of the biggest challenges that we have even today is disparate systems with disparate data. And
Yeah.
this is a problem that is self-created. We allowed this to happen. There was no regulation. There was no industry standards. We allowed
Yeah.
this to happen and we didn't pay attention to it. And now, for the last 10 years, we've kind of been scratching our heads going, well, this is a big problem. It's like, well, we created it ourselves. What did you think? And we are still complaining about it. And so when I
Yeah.
when I look back, over my tenure in supply chain, I'm surprised that we're still so heavily reliant on Excel, um,
Yes.
because it's still, when you double click and double click, it's still the backbone of a lot of Fortune 500 supply chains. Um,
Yeah.
I think that supply chain practitioners in particular are somewhat hesitant, in terms of moving moving platform. They do rely heavily on the, if it's not broken, don't fix it, um,
Yes.
even if that's to the detriment of progress. And this is the battle of, is supply chain a cost center or are we actually a sales contributor? And that argument continues to percolate across all levels of supply chain. So I think that the challenge that we have right now is that, to my earlier point, the digital supply chain has always been ahead of the physical supply chain. Or sorry, the physical supply chain
Yes.
has always been ahead of the digital supply
And
chain.
ahead of it.
Now that's switched. Now the digital supply chain has absolutely leaped over the physical supply chain. And we're kind of in this interesting time whereby, well, we got to fix this now. We have got to get this working in the right way because the physical infrastructure is going to take a lot longer to change, but we don't need to worry so much about that if we're able to augment it on the digital side. And this is the
Yeah.
this is the preaching that I do now in the industry.
Yeah, I totally agree, David. And I guess it is. I mean, again, if you think back to the year 2000 and the 2 decades that followed, I mean, software completely changed. Like the movement to the internet, the movement to the cloud, the introduction of mobile. It was incredibly complex. But I also see exactly like you say, speaking to shippers every day, especially ones that have a large global footprint. It is absolutely staggering how many international TMSs and ERPs that these companies have almost in each country.
Right.
You're talking about dozens of different systems, and you have, every one of them has a different kind of data format. Every set of users has a different workflow. None of the data synchronizes. It is a huge problem, and even if you look at other industries as well, like even look at banking and finance.
Right.
In a lot of ways, that kind of genre of software has kind of moved faster than global supply chain. But if you look at banks still, I mean, a lot of the, AES 400, a lot of, batch files, there's still a lot of old technology. And like you
Right.
say, it's not just, kind of big shippers and big logistics groups that say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Or, it is a giant leap to take this huge system out and try and replace it later.
Right. And that's and it's kind of like the elusive obvious, right? Everybody
Yeah,
actually understands that this is the problem, but who's really willing to take a risk, you know? I had the
yeah,
opportunity to do that, and I took it because I'd got to that point of frustration, and I was kind of tired of I was tired of incremental improvement. It just wasn't working for me because it's not the way that
yeah,
my brain is wired. I couldn't do it. I stopped everybody talking about continuous improvement because I said, I don't the continuous improvement just doesn't make any sense to me because we're
yeah,
not moving the dial in any direction. So can
yes,
we either revolutionize or we do nothing? And I'm okay if we do
yeah.
nothing. I just wanted to be really clear that I'm not going to hide behind a cloud of ambiguity called continuous improvement because that's not
Totally.
innovation. That's not going to change anything.
I totally agree with you, and I think to finish up on that piece as well, from a personal perspective, David, I've felt like, my last company, Containers, we were born around that kind of 2015 era when the
Right.
first wave of kind of venture backed companies were coming in, and Containers didn't go down the venture backed route. But, I remember looking at all these companies that were raising venture and being so excited about, how they could kind of come in and change the industry. And, a decade later, when you kind of look back, there wasn't too many, if any, category winners, the
Right.
way you've seen in other industries. So, you know, it's been kind of like a kind of a bunch of different events, I think, over that kind of 2000 to 2025 quarter of a century era. The introduction of cloud, like all of the systems you talked about, but also, this kind of 2015 to 2025 era, if we kind of retrospect and look back on it, the companies have raised hundreds of millions, in some cases, a billion plus.
Right.
And they haven't won a category, or they haven't kind of done something great that everybody can, if you look at the great software companies that have won in other industries like an SAP, a ServiceNow, or a Salesforce, where they've built a set of tools that massively positively impact um, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people every day. We haven't kind of got that yet in global supply chain. So I'm hopeful in this coming decade we'll see a bunch of category winners that will put that right.
Well, hopefully it's Ship Angel, right? I mean, that's that's what.
Hope so. Hope
Yeah.
so. I'm kind of trying to put pressure on ourselves here.
But I mean, if you think about it, you're right. There hasn't been a clear category game changer. A lot of the focus over the last decade has been around visibility. And that was seen as, there's a lot of phrases, maybe it came out of Gartner at some point, but it was visibility is key. If you have visibility, then all your other problems will be solved. I'm just I'm intrigued by that. I was one of the very early pioneers. We built we built visibility in Microsoft. We partnered with C.H. Robinson back in the early days, and we worked together on their product Navisphere Vision. And that whole concept was about having your world on a page, one pane of glass to show everything. And it was really good. It was, it was state of the art. And once we built it, we put it up on a beautiful Surface 84-inch hub. And, we had the world
Wow.
and we said, what problem have we just solved? And we realized that the visibility was only the beginning of the opportunity. the visibility gave you the sort of the foundational data. It was then what you did with it
Yes.
that was going to make a difference. And even today, in my role in Overhaul, again, it's less about the visibility and it's more about the data. And it's the
Yes.
fact that we have 30 billion data points. We're adding 250 million a month. And
Ah,
we have got the ability to understand every bad event that has ever happened in the supply chain that we're monitoring, which allows us to then build a predictive model. It's this evolution now of we can't keep thinking about supply chain the way we've thought about it for the last
yeah.
25 years. We have got to think about it in a different way, which
Yes.
leads us perfectly into this next chapter.
Absolutely. I mean, I know we've used the words AI, but we've got 35 minutes into this conversation without talking about AI. I feel like that is like an absolute
It's a,
record.
it's a record. Well
You know,
done.
I
Yeah, good
I
go
think
us.
I
Yeah.
think 8 minutes was my previous record. So uh brilliant. And you're right, David. That is a great segue in. And um what's so fascinating for me on AI has just been this kind of constant improvement. I mean, we were just so fortunate when we founded Chip Angel back in 2023, less than 100 days after Anthropic launched the first version of Claude. We were talking to them. We became partners. We started working with Claude to solve gnarly problems like ocean rate sheets and things like that. And even if I think back to 2023, it feels like the year 2000 really, in terms of just
Right.
how far we've come so quickly. And like we were saying the other day, David, it's not just about, like, everybody in supply chain software is talking about AI, but my mother's also asked me who Claude is. And everybody in the world is kind of, ChatGPT is touching 1 billion users,
Right.
almost a fifth of the world. It feels like, and the segue from my comment about, like, we didn't quite get the category winners last time, AI feels like it potentially unlocks everything, like at the highest levels. Demis in DeepMind. We also live in a time where Elon can land rockets instead of chopsticks. I mean, surely in this world, with this level of technology, we can solve with supply chain. What do you think, and how do you kind of like, how do you stay kind of in line here? Because there's a lot of hype too, right?
It's remarkable. I mean, and I do talk about this a lot, in the industry, and I just love the statistics around how we got here. When you look back, if you take 100 million as general acceptance of use, it took the internet as we know it today, it took that about 15 years to get to 100 million users. Mobile phones, it took about 8 years. Facebook took about 3 years. ChatGPT took 5 weeks. So the level
Wow.
of democratization of this technology, the zero barrier to entry, because anybody with any sort of device can actually use it, is
Mhm.
it's just incredible. It's actually historically, I'm not sure that we've ever seen anything like this to
No.
percolate so fast. And so everybody is super excited. Now, this
Yeah.
is where, my favorite, Roy Amara was a futurist out of Stanford in the
Yes.
70s, and he coined Amara's law. And Amara's law states that we tend to overestimate the usefulness of technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And
Yes.
I think that those are the cycles that we're currently going through, whereby, 2 years ago it was like all jobs will be gone. There'll be no white collar jobs. Everything will disappear. Everything will be automated. We'll reach full, AGI. Everything will be different, and we're done. And then over the last 2 years, like, well, there's a lot of hallucinations, and
Yeah.
maybe we're saving arms and legs, but it's not real people. And so we're in that trough of disillusionment. And and it's kind of fun to watch when you know that that's not the end goal. We're now at that sort of point of inflection whereby, Graham, we cannot even conceptualize what this is going to be like.
Yes.
And you remember. So my favorite story here is the Steve Jobs one, right? When he launched the iPhone, he launched it as three products. If you watch the video,
Yes.
he launched three products. He said, It's a widescreen iPod. It is a really cool phone, and it is a revolutionary internet connectivity device. Everybody ignored the third point, and the third
Yeah.
point was actually the core of everything that we do with an iPhone today. And so we're in that same cycle right now, whereby the major use cases that you see are all around automation. We're automating the
Yeah.
old things that we used to do. And we're calling that innovation and we're getting excited. And I'm fine with that. I'm actually like, yep, this is great. Definitely fantastic. But we haven't even started to conceptualize what the real opportunity is here. And
Yeah.
we're being bombarded. The industry is being bombarded with very early stage companies who claim to have solved all supply chain problems because they figured out a nice way to use Claude. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this is going to be a problem because you're going to enhance that disillusionment. And so big
Yeah.
corporations are a little bit wary. They're like, I don't know, do I want to do this? I've read a lot about, databases being wiped and, I'm losing all my intellectual property and all of these things. Um, do I want to take the risk? And what's the real return on investment? And these
Yes.
hype cycles of, well, we can do everything. Just give us all your problems and we will solve all of them. It's like, okay, that's not helping because
Yeah.
this has to be specific. You see, what you've done in Ship Angel is you have taken a specific problem, you have created an AI native solution. An AI native in this
Yeah.
sense means that that's where you started and you've enhanced that
Yes.
along the way, but you've got a real tangible solution to a real tangible problem, and people
Yeah.
understand that. That's signal.
Yeah.
The hype
Yes.
is give me all your
Yes.
problems and let me figure them out for you. That's
Yeah.
my interpretation right now. Graham, I don't know. Is
Yeah.
that what you see?
I totally agree with you. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a hammer looking for nails. And
Yeah,
the kind of analogy I like to use when I think about it as well is, if you think about self-driving cars, um, and the journey of, going from where we started to where we were, I think that falls into three categories: 0 to 90. And I think, 7 years ago when Elon said, all cars will be self-driving in 4 years, it was because he saw the 0 to 90 journey happen relatively quickly,
right,
probably faster than he thought, which meant that the car could drive down a motorway, unassisted. The 90 to 99 has taken them 6 or 7 painful years of, it has to turn off in a lane on the, when
right,
it gets permission in Amsterdam, like it did a few weeks ago, it has to understand all of these kind of European trams and everything else. And the 90 to 99 journey is just so painful. And even with
right.
the resources and skill of Tesla, it's taken them years. And now, in my humble opinion, I think they're at the 99 stage. Like there's still going to be, you know, 0.2% of crazy edge cases that it still doesn't solve for. And that 99 to 100 may never quite get there. It might, or it's going to
Right.
move so much slower. And that's exactly what AI feels like to me right now. And again, we're obviously big proponents, and one thing we'll do right now in demos is we have this thing called prototype pipeline, and sometimes a customer will say, "This is great, but if it could show me analytics on my LCL in South America for CO2, it would be more interesting." And you could literally say, hang on, I'm going to prompt our prototype pipeline, and it would actually build it in front of you in like 4 or 5 minutes, fully
Right.
clickable, as if it just appeared in the product magically. And from a customer perspective, it's great. But that is the 0 to 90. Like, we
Yeah.
can all do that now very, very quickly. We can all build and we can all say, we can replicate these super high-end enterprise systems. Like I can replicate Salesforce. Yeah, you can build a store of what they have. But what about the 2,500 connectors behind it? That's the
Yeah.
90 to 99. And then the
Right.
99 to 100 might be like all the super, super proprietary stuff they have and everything else. And I feel that's where, people are kind of getting a little bit confused as well.
I think you're right, and I think that this is one of the challenges right now, which is the return on investment, and
Yes.
what does it really look like? And there's this is going to be a a continued conversation. And you know that you're part of Masters of Supply Chain as well as an
Yes.
industry forum, and we had this conversation actually last week in a roundtable with some kind of leading edge supply chain VCs, and they all came back to the same point, which is it's all about the tangible use cases and then the practical
Yes.
application. Until you show me how this actually can demonstrate a movement of a needle in a company, it's
Yes.
vaporware. It doesn't make any sense. I also think, Graham, that there's something in the democratized technology is really cool. And for personal workspaces, I use it all the time and I love it and I think it's great. But in that enterprise environment, I still think it requires more of a development function. It's not
Yes.
just drop it in and let it work. I
No.
actually think that it takes an element of expertise and a real thoughtful set of positioning to make sure that you're hitting the right notes. Now, this will change over time, and this
Yes.
will absolutely get better. But people have to stop getting frustrated, and understand that you know the old concept of all ships have to rise with the tide doesn't apply here. It's like maybe you only
Yes.
need one ship to rise. Where you've got
Yes.
good data, where you've got a really clean process, that's my
Yeah.
recommendation of where to start with a
Yeah.
good AI implementation, because you understand the pros and cons, the inputs, the outputs, and that will help you be successful. Throwing AI into random environments where the data is disparate and not working very well, it's probably not going to give you a whole bunch of success. And then
Yeah.
you're going to be on the naysayer list and go, oh, well, that doesn't really work. It's like, well, what did you expect? Like, the AI is
Yeah.
not magic, right? So
No.
that we got to be clear, right? It is not.
Yeah.
It is not the golden nugget. It is not the silver bullet. It is not magic fairy dust. However, in the right environment, with the right application, with the right problem set, it can be
Yes.
game changing. And that's how you have to
Yeah.
think about
Absolutely agree. And it is. I think it is very difficult. Again, I speak to large shippers every day, and like this concept of like, where do you start in 2026? How do you kind of think about the base? How do you think about what your system of record is going to look like? I mean, even one of the things that we think a lot about in Ship Angel is like implementation times and like trying to
it.
really
Right.
squash those down. And there's lots of reasons for that. But one of them is like, it's not even in the top three, but it's one that I think about a lot, which is, you know, if you did take a traditional implementation time frame, that we see for enterprise products in our industry, 6, 9, 12, maybe 18 months, um, that's kind of gone out the door, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even if you said like, this is a great product, I'm going to sign a contract with you, and thanks for implementing it in the next 18 months. I mean, we're also in a world that's compounding much more than we've been used to, and
Right.
that's a real source of danger for folks to think about too in 2026. Would you think?
There's no, I mean, those timelines just don't make sense anymore. I mean, we have been
Yeah.
completely Amazonified, right? Everything is just in time, but it has to be right now. And
Yeah.
and when you look at some of the progress that we've made in terms of, even, writing code, the traditional timelines just don't apply. And this is actually one of the challenges that the VCs actually have right now, because
Yeah.
their traditional funding models no longer apply. Because it used to
Yeah.
be, okay, I love where you've got founder-led sales. Now you're going to build a dev team, you're going to build a marketing team, you're going to build a sales team. That's why we're going to give you funding, and this is your accelerated path. Now it's like,
Yeah.
well, I've already built all of those because I've got a stream of agents who are doing all of that.
Yes.
Well, what are you going to do with the money? And this is actually a really interesting sort of twist. But right now, from an enterprise perspective, nobody is going to accept those type of timelines. It's going to
Yeah.
be, hey, if you tell me that it's going to be a 12-month implementation, by the time you've implemented, the world will have pivoted again on its axis. Like, back to your early point, Graham, right? When you started this journey with Ship Angel, and you were one of the earliest partners with Anthropic, even the technology that you were using then
Yeah.
seems archaic to what you've got now. Like this is moving at such a pace. Anything that you think you figured out right now will be irrelevant in 12 months. This is a
Yeah,
huge danger for a lot of companies if they don't like,
totally agree.
the worst conversations that I have right now are companies where they're of the opinion that we should let other people figure out the bugs in this system and then we'll jump in. And my opinion is
Yes.
no, 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 no. This is not like a new instance of SAP. Like you don't,
Yeah,
if you treat it like this, you will be left behind. You've got to be part of the journey. You cannot
yeah,
sit on the sidelines and hope that everybody else figures it out because by the time they do, you will be irrelevant. And if that creates fear in the organization, that's a good thing because you got to get the
yeah.
motivation to work quicker and smarter on this because it's happening. This isn't a, maybe if, this is a when conversation. So you've got to get on board.
100%, David. And I think that's literally one of the things that I say to folks most as well, when I speak to customers is, a couple of people have said to me, but when cloud came along, I kind of sat on the sidelines for a year or two and I waited and I eventually did it. And here's where the upside was,
Yeah,
without any mention of downside. And I say the exact same thing that you said, which is that one thing is for sure, we there is no waiting here. Like I remember, a lot of folks say to me, we should frame the emails we have from Anthropic in the early days, like 2023, before anybody knew who they were, and they helped us so much at the start. But you're 100% right. Like, in our demos, we're able to take these incredibly complex rate sheets with thousands of lines in any format, and the AI pipeline just magically puts them into a platform and overlays all the data on top. I remember 6 months in questioning my life choices, back in 2023, because we were 6 months in and it just did not work. And,
right.
I remember people were saying, oh, you shouldn't have laughed at BPO centers so quickly, huh? And I was like, maybe they're right. And it really was. It really was like not great. You knew there was something there, but the amount of errors and the amount of hallucinations. But that does go to kind of, the point too, that we are moving at a pace that we've never seen before. Like, you've been
Right.
through more cycles than I have, but I just started my career at the internet, and I remember how slow that was. And it reminds me of building a city in the desert. There was no infrastructure there.
Right.
And then we had to do all the plumbing with the internet, and everybody had to go online, and we had to get proper speeds and everything else. And then everybody put devices in our hands with more power than what sent the astronauts to the moon back in the day. Um,
Right.
but all the infrastructure is there. So this is completely different to these waves. It's I can see it over 3 years. It really feels like 20 have happened in 3 years, and I couldn't agree with you more about that concept of waiting is the most dangerous thing you can, one of the most dangerous things you can do. You can't sit this one out. This is a wave like I don't think we'll ever see in our lifetimes again.
No, and we're I'm kind of lucky that I feel very blessed that I'm like at this point in my career and I'm still in the middle of this huge transition. And
Yeah,
I kind of think about my role now as I've got to take those, 30 years of experience and just make sure that people don't reinvent the wheel. This is
mm,
not, don't try to fix all of the things that I've already fixed. Now take
yes,
this and do something incredible with it. And so
yes,
this chapter is patterns that work. The key thing for me is really, and I tell this to, supply chain leaders all the time. It is, go back to the adage, if it's not broken, don't fix it. You should. It's time to break it now.
yeah,
Because this is going to be a problem if you don't.
yeah,
The second thing is you have got to try. There is
yeah,
absolutely no, the conversation used to be, do I build or do I buy? And that was a hang up for a lot of companies. I always said that there was a third element to that conversation, and that third element is called try. So do I build,
yes,
do I buy, or do I try? We are now in an era whereby you can try. One of the things
yes,
that I really focused on with my team in Microsoft was, and it was called the growth mindset, and the ability to fail fast. But we used to have crazy ideas, and then we would work with partners who could turn those around instantly.
Yeah.
And we would have a crazy
Totally.
idea on a Friday afternoon, and we'd have some level of wild prototype by the following Tuesday. And then we would make a
Ah,
decision and go, is this the right thing to do?
yeah.
Or is that the dumbest thing we ever thought of? And
Yeah.
we moved at that pace. And that taught the organization to change rapidly. It taught the organization to not get hung up on individual problems, that it was always
Yes.
about the greater goal. But it starts
Totally.
with this concept of, but these are not, this is not about sitting back having committee meetings and discussing. It's
It's
about
do.
being
Yeah.
hands-on and getting engaged. And that's why,
Totally.
it kind of frightens when I hear companies saying, well, yeah, we turned off ChatGPT because it was too dangerous. I'm like going, wow, that's such a bold move. And I don't know if
Yeah.
we'll ever recover from it because
Yeah.
you
None.
need to, your people need to get excited about this to
Yes.
understand the true potential. Um,
Oh,
because we can't, nobody can explain to you what the true potential is yet, which means you have to
exactly.
be part of it. You're part of the
Yeah.
definition. Do you know why iPhones are like the main hub today? It's because of the usability. It's because people kept
Yes.
on asking for more and they went beyond the boundaries. Like the number of
Exactly.
app developers were always
Yeah.
solving problems that we didn't even know were a problem until they'd solved it for us. That's
Yes.
where supply chain needs to get to, Graham. That's where we,
Completely.
we need to be, we need to be so ingrained in this that it
Yeah.
becomes just a part of our culture.
Couldn't agree with you more. Um, somehow we've got almost got to the top of the hour already. You and I could probably talk for 3 more days, and we probably will,
We
but we
could.
won't bore
We,
everybody. If we've got three 4 minutes left. If there's anybody listening that has any questions for us, um, look for the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom window here, and you can submit your questions, or uh, for there's a question here for you, David, actually. If you were taking over supply chain at a new company today, what's the first thing you would assess?
I would assess my life choices and wonder why I'm still in supply chain, Graham, and say, why didn't I get a job in
Take a
marketing?
long
What
look
was
in the
I
mirror.
doing here? I, I think, I mean, look,
Ask if the
as
chat GPT is turned on.
I think the first thing that I would do is it's the same thing that I've always done, right? I just take a look at the as is. It's the old consultant in me. I take a look at the as is, figure out what works really well, make that work even better, and scrap everything else and start again. That's exactly the way that I've always done things, and it works over time. Sometimes it's a shock to the system initially, but it really is. And this is the kind of the interesting part right now is there's still a continued debate, and it's more of a philosophical one around with the ability for agentic AI in particular to do so much. How do we retain experience? So the reason that I've been in supply chain for 30 years, I've wrapped pallets, I've moved pallets in a warehouse, I've built warehouses, I've been on trucks, I've done deliveries, I've done all of these things. I've been on the manufacturing shop floor, I've inserted components into motherboards. I've done all of this, which has helped me build that level of expertise. If a lot of that of those manual tasks, if you like, get automated, how do we build
Yes.
that depth in supply chain? That's a philosophical question that we're still trying to figure out. But that sort of, right now we talk about this concept of human in the loop. There's another
Yeah.
sort of next iteration of that, which is we've got to stop thinking about it as human in the loop, and we've got to start talking about computer in the group. So bring it back
Oh,
in on
yes.
the other way. And then, my good friend Deborah Dull has written a book about the next evolution of supply chain. And her concept was really cool in terms of how do you control agents in your supply chain? Treat them as
Yes.
employees. So the organization
Yes.
of the future is partly humans and partly agents, but you treat them all in the same way. That's how you give them the organizational boundaries to be able to be
Yes.
successful. So I think if I was going into a supply chain job today, I would think about where are the sweet spots? Where are the things that we could do something really creative? Where are the things that we should just stop doing? How do I implement Ship Angel? Of course, would be number one.
100%.
And then how do I build this cohabiting model? Like we got to remember, it's called co-pilot, not pilot. Like how do we
Yes,
build this beautiful model of coexistence whereby agents and experts work together to build that next generation?
100%. I totally agree with you, David. It'll be a very interesting rest of the year, also known as a decade, the way things were going. But thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for everybody that tuned in today. And if you didn't, we will make a copy available. Thank you again, David, for taking the time today. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Absolutely my pleasure, Graham, and look forward to more conversations in the future as the world shifts around us.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.